Salutations, Seekers. This is Wordsmythe Entry 2, and the book today is going to be Foundryside, Book 1 of a trilogy by Robert Jackson Bennett. I do have it on my Kindle today instead of a physical book, as I don't always have the capacity to get a book in its physical form, unfortunately. The Kindle works just as well and is a lot more mobile, so that's a nice aspect of it. So, for this book, it is going to follow the story of a thief who has been hired to steal a very specific object that turns out to be wildly more powerful than anything she could have imagined, and is in fact a tool that could change the fate of her city and her life and the world itself, depending on who gets a hold of it. So it's a interesting measure of what is worth fighting for, what's worth survival. And so, on that note, it's going to be a medium to high level diction. You're looking at probably a few new words that you haven't read before if you are an avid reader. I would recommend it to anyone who is a lover of high fantasy and fiction. It is going to have, and this is my favorite thing about the book, it's going to have a very unique concept of magic. It's not magic in the sense of, cast a spell and a fireball comes out. Instead, it takes more along the lines of a Boolean expression of code and programming and language to alter reality itself. And the example I can give directly from the book is, let's say you have a wagon wheel. They have what is called the language of the gods, the divine language, as opposed to the earthly language. Now, the divine language can actually be used to convince an object that reality is different from what we see it as. So for this wheel, you can write a specific chain of commands on it, and it will make the wheel think that it is going downhill, even as it's sitting on a completely level ground. So what this does, obviously, is what happens when a wheel goes downhill. It starts to roll. So it's basically locomotion, without ever providing any kind of active energy or force that does so. Now, obviously, it makes this wildly expensive, and what's the interesting thing about this is the book does go kind of in depth into the socio-economic difference of what a society is like when ruled by a plutocracy. And that is a group of individuals who have the most money, and they're the ones that then have the power. And for this particular story, you're looking at each little merchant house having its own city area that it controls and owns, and its word is law within that, even as it sits within the city as a whole. And each of those merchant families then have to have a council to make sure that one merchant family doesn't get over too much of the other, because it's constant backstabbing and betrayal. But in the end, money is law. And so it's really interesting to see how they can take this concept of how can we alter reality to make profit. Locomotion for the wheels, they have lights that only turn on at specific times or maybe follow you around for a guiding lantern. They have eventually, a lot of cool things that they do with it. And it's really interesting to see how you can do that, because the same thing happens. As an example, my roommate loves this story. It's an assignment that you have to write, where you have to describe exactly how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. However, if you miss even one little step and one little detail, it can be viewed, literally, if you're reading it and taking it at completely face value, as a huge, confusing mess. If you don't specifically say that the peanut butter side has to match to the jelly side, well, then they're going to put it the wrong way somehow, or in fact they're just going to put it in the wrong place, and you don't know. It's the same thing here. If the logic is not explicitly perfect, terrible things can happen. And there's fun stuff that they do with that too. It gets pretty crazy. Of course, then you have the normal magical concept of endowed entities and items, magic items as it were, is how they're portrayed as, even as the actual source of the magic is different. And that's why I'm really focusing on that unique magic aspect of this book, because I love when they take a familiar and favorite classic trope, magic to pursue technology instead of technology at the forefront, and instead beautifully melded them together into an entirely new way. So I would definitely recommend it to anyone who is a fan of something like Brandon Sanderson or Brent Weeks, as they are really good authors. I love their works, and they are consistently ingenious in the magic that they portray in their stories. So, if you want just a 60-second clip of the breakdown for the book, The link to my TikTok is in my bio, and there will be a video on that. Otherwise, salutations, Seekers.